Something is fragile if it is damaged by disturbances of one kind or another. In contrast, something is antifragile if it actually benefits or gets stronger in the face of disturbances. In this video, I'm going to explore how we can make our public discussions antifragile, so that the health and quality of outcome from our public discussions actually gets better from the cut and thrust of rigorous debate. In the book where Nassim Nicholas Taleb introduces the term antifragile, he describes a general pattern for things that have the property of being antifragile. He argues that they are typically constructed out of parts that are themselves fragile, but where the dynamics by which those parts are created and destroyed gives rise to the antifragility for some greater whole. For example, muscles are antifragile, getting stronger by being put under stresses and strains, while those very same stresses often damage particular muscle cells that make up the overall muscle tissue. So, how can we link the idea of antifragility to public discussions? Well, portfolism is the framework through which I usually think about public discussions. And for our purposes here, there are a few key features of portfolism that I'll just quickly restate. Firstly, I often depict a single argument as being a blue line that extends our thinking in some way. I then depict a rational argument as a blue line with an arrow indicating the rational, calculative component that supports the rational argument. I then argue that rather than seeing different communities as inhabiting completely separate bubbles, instead, our shared evolutionary inheritance and embodiment in the same world means that there is always some minimal commonality between the different dialects of reason that each of our communities use. But within each of our communities, we use our respective dialects of reason to construct rational and non-rational arguments that extend from this shared commonality into places where there is significant divergence between the thinking of each of the communities. So we are often arguing between the tips of the fingers in this diagram. But it's also worth noting that we can each switch between using different dialects of reason depending on the context in which we find ourselves. We will likely argue with a different reasoning style when in a court of law as opposed to when in a scientific conference, compared to when at a local community gathering. So this hand-shaped diagram also captures the different ways of reasoning within each of our own thinking. And lastly, in portfolism I argue that when publicly making a case for or against a particular course of action, there are benefits of using a collection of arguments across a range of different dialects of reason. By taking such a portfolio approach, we can minimize the risks that there is an error in our reasoning within any one of the arguments. Now, in this video, we're going to look at how the same portfolio approach can be thought of in terms of antifragility. So imagine that we collected a group of arguments that each speak in favour of a particular policy. And then the policy can be thought of as one member of a group of policies that together try to advocate for a general political goal. For example, the overall political goal might be the environmental goal of having a healthy, thriving biosphere. In order to achieve this goal, you might then have a number of policies, and for each policy you would collate a portfolio of arguments that give the reasons why the policy will help achieve the overall political goal. Now, remember the pattern that Taleb identified for situations that enable antifragility is when you have a collection of fragile parts that together form an antifragile whole. Well, in the case we're talking about here, we could therefore see the arguments as being the underlying fragile parts that we are initially collecting together into an antifragile portfolio of arguments for a given policy. In other words, we should not stubbornly defend individual arguments in the face of good evidence that the argument is not working. Instead, we should let them be fragile in a way that enables the overall portfolio to be antifragile. But note, I'm not saying that we should abandon an argument upon the first challenge to that argument, just saying that we shouldn't cling on to arguments blindly. But it is also true that as we discuss an issue more with others, not only might some of our existing arguments fail, but we might also become aware of new arguments that should be added to the portfolio. And overall, this removal of weaker arguments and inclusion of newer, stronger arguments should, in the first instance, increase the overall strength and persuasiveness of the portfolio of arguments. Letting the arguments be fragile enables the portfolio to be antifragile. However, as Taleb notes, even antifragile things have their limits beyond which too much of a disturbance flips them into a fragile mode. Antifragile bones eventually snap. Antifragile species eventually go extinct. In our case here, it is the antifragile portfolio of arguments for a given policy that eventually might completely fail if too many of the underlying arguments themselves fail. But again, we should not mourn the loss of a policy that is failing. Instead, we should move our attention up to the broader political goal that the policy was aiming to achieve. We should go meta. And then, at this level, we can see that it's okay to allow the individual policies to be fragile in the face of strong evidence against them. By allowing policies to be dropped and be replaced by better policies, that means we should, in the end, have more chance of achieving our overall political goals, such as having a healthy biosphere. Again, we can see the pattern of fragile parts enabling the greater whole to be antifragile. So, at both the individual argument level and then at the policy level too, it is a mistake to cling on to arguments or policies that are demonstrably failing. We should therefore welcome the stresses and strains of healthy debate, as then, with the right attitude, this can enable our overall public discussion to be antifragile, with our arguments and policies for achieving a high-level political goal getting better over time. A psychological key to achieving this is for us all to try not to let our sense of identity get too strongly attached to particular arguments or policies. As Julia Galef says, we should hold our identities lightly and try to avoid being soldiers defending particular arguments to the last. Instead, we should try to adopt the Scout mindset of honestly appraising the merits of arguments and then let them go if they fail to stand up to such scrutiny. And if we took this approach to all aspects of our public discussion, I think it would allow us to engage with each other's arguments in healthier ways, as oftentimes we actually agree with the highest level goals, that we want our children, communities, and environment to all thrive. And then it's good to subject particular policies to the stresses of rigorous debate. If we adopt this kind of anti-fragile, portfolist approach to public discussion, then the result of rigorous, healthy debate will be better arguments for better policies. It's good for us to argue in a healthy way. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then you might like the related videos on the side here. And please do click on the like button below or subscribe to my channel, as that will encourage YouTube to share this video with more people. And do let me know in the comments below, what do you think about the ideas of anti-fragile public discussion? Thank you for watching.